Hello, everyone. Okay, so the last video you may or may not have seen was about AO1, which is probably the easiest AO. I think it's just you remembering something. But this video is about AO2, which I think is actually the AO that students find the hardest. It's not the hardest, obviously. Evaluation AO3 is a lot harder, but people put a lot more effort into AO3, and by the time of the exams, they generally can evaluate off the top of their heads quite well. But what most students do is they take their eye off the ball of AO2 and think, oh, it's easy, I can do that. It's just direct quoting, but actually AO2 goes quite far. AO2 is more complicated than AO1 in the sense of AO1 is remembering something, but you cannot prepare for AO2. You cannot revise AO2. You have to be able to think on your feet in the exam of how to apply something, yet you cannot do AO2 without AO1. So when we're talking about AO2 again, let me just show you this chart. Where is it going to come up most? Paper 2. It's so much more in paper 2 than any other paper. So again, we're looking. Oh, I've not put it on the laser pointer. AO2 here is obviously application. And have a look. I mean, between 6 and 9% of your entire grade. Between 6 and 9% of your entire grade, AO2 paper 1, 5 and 8%, but up to almost 20% of your grade, 20% of your entire grade is based solely off AO2 in paper 2. And it's why most people do poorly on paper 2 compared to paper 1, paper 3, where they do okay. People do poorly in paper 2 because they underestimate, two reasons. They underestimate research methods and they underestimate how much application and contextualization you have to do. So, so if we're having a look here, I've got a random, let's start with the research method side of things, right? Because you have to apply a lot in research methods. You have to apply all the time in research methods, and most of the time it's missed out. So what I've got in front of me is a paper 2. I've obviously gone past the approaches and biopsychology sections. I've gone to the double 48 marker research section, which I think is from 2018. It's one about dreams. So the reason why I've got this one up is because most people don't even realize that they have to apply to, in this case, the STEM. So this STEM is about dreaming, right? So let me just read on the next page this STEM we've got here, which basically sets you up for the next 48 marks. The psychologist was interested in finding out whether dream themes differed between males and females. So basically, do males and females dream differently, particularly in terms of social interaction? Very weird. She decided to conduct a pilot study. Fine. Now, if I was reading through that and I'd highlight it in an exam, I'd highlight that. Why the hell have they said that? She decided to conduct a pilot study. They're obviously going to then ask you about that. They word these stems very, very carefully. So what you might want to do is a really good strategy, actually, is to highlight the bits that stand out. So, dream themes. So, okay, dream themes differed. Okay, it's an experiment because they're looking to see if there is a significant difference between, it probably is an experiment, between males and females. She decided to conduct a pilot study. Again, why have they put that? They're obviously going to ask questions about it. 20 undergraduate students, 8 male and 12 female. Now, again, I can't actually remember this, but that to me would suggest maybe stratified sampling, like uneven groups of people would suggest that they're going to ask a question about stratified sampling. I need to double check to see if they've done this because it's going to annoy me if I got it wrong. So, and they volunteered as well, so they might ask that. So for a 6-week period, the students were interviewed at 9 a.m. each morning when they arrived at university. Interviewers who did not know the purpose of the study, so it's double blind. Again, why are they putting that? They're going to ask you questions. They're going to ask you a question about validity or double blind or something. They carried out and recorded the dream interviews. So again, we are looking at interviews here. First question is quite important. In terms of AO2, what is meant by a pilot study, right? And then there's a second part of the question, which is what you really need to be aware of. Sometimes when they ask a question, they're technically asking 2, sometimes 3 questions. What is a pilot study? Explain one reason why the psychologist decided to conduct a pilot study. And then in terms of AO2, you have the most important part of the question for this investigation. Why is that important? Because you have to tailor your answer to dreams or dream themes or 20 undergraduate students. So, for example, what is a pilot study? That gets 1 mark. That gets 1 mark. A pilot study is a small-scale investigation of a study that you propose to perform. You get 1 mark for that. You then have to explain one possible reason why the psychologist decided to conduct a pilot study for this investigation. So your answer, you have to write something about the study here. Now, it says for this investigation. It also says in this study, for this study, in this case. You have to look out for these questions, because if they say something like this, and it's not always at the end of the question, if they say something like this, you will absolutely not get full marks at all. And sometimes you get capped 50%. You will not get marked full mark. You'll never get full marks if you do not contextualize. So, for example, off the top of my head, explain one reason, what possible reason why the psychologist decided to conduct a study for the pilot study. You might want to say, well, again, use a good little skill here, and write this down somewhere, please. But a really, really key skill is to use the terminology of the question, because you cannot use the terminology of the question and then not answer the question. So, for example, it's a bit of a pain, it's a bit of a ball ache, I get that. But one possible reason why the psychologist decided to conduct a pilot study would be to see whether 9 a.m., again, that's contextualized. I'm taking something from the spec and putting it in there to see whether the 9 a.m. dream interviews, again, very contextualized so far, would be an adequate time in order for people to be able to recall their dreams. You might want to say, maybe 9 a.m. they've woken up, they woke up 2 hours before, they've forgotten their dreams, for example. So that's why you would do a pilot study, is to see for the main investigation whether you had to adjust that 9 a.m. time. And so you've got qualitative, investigator effects, content analysis. I'm just trying to see. Yeah, I mean, it's really subtle. Again, 3 mark. Again, same sort of question. What are investigator effects? You've got 1 mark for saying what investigator. AO1, not important. Investigator effects are when the investigator can sometimes have conscious or unconscious, undesired effects upon the participants, and they give away what the study is about. And then what you have to do is suggest one way in which they could have minimized, right, during the dream interviews. So then your question has to be specifically about the dream interviews. And again, it's honestly research methods and all questions, really, they are riddled with it, absolutely riddled. But have a look at this question here. It clearly isn't. It doesn't need contextualization. So as I'm just reading out this question, just think, where's the dream interviews here? The psychologist wanted to assess the reliability of the content analysis. Fine, fair enough. Reliability, how consistent are content analysis? If you do a content analysis once and you do it again, are you going to get a similar result between them? So the question in this case is, explain how the reliability of the content analysis could be assessed. You actually don't need context for this, because it doesn't specifically ask you in terms of dream interviews. So you have to know when to go AO1, you have to know when to go AO2. If you go wrong, you get no marks. So that's really going to annoy me if there's nothing to do with nothing to do with the old stratified sampling. Random sampling. Anyway, I'm wasting your time and mine. So what I also wanted to go on to here is outside of research methods, where they often will ask you questions. So I've got a couple of pure AO2 questions just here. So we've got this one here, which is actually really, really rare. I think it's one of only 2 maximum 7 markers that have come up. 7 markers, you've never heard of a 7 marker probably. So a small group of environmentally aware sixth form students, so you guys who care about the environment, are campaigning for their school to become paper free for the next 6 months. And this is in the context of minority influence, by the way. Recently, they had a meeting with a group of teachers who represent the teaching staff, and the teachers told the students that the school could become paper free if the group convinced the rest of the student body it was a good idea. And the question in this case, this is your STEM. You absolutely have to apply to this. AO2, 7 marks. All 7 marks go towards AO2. The question: use your knowledge of conformity and minority influence to explain the factors that will determine how successful the small group will be. Now, the factors are obviously consistency, commitment, flexibility. If you just tell me, if you just outline, if you just describe commitment, consistency, flexibility, you get nothing, absolute nothing. The other one, which I'm going to go into a bit more detail and give you a bit more example, is this one just here. So again, I mean, there's loads. Look, AO2, 6 marks. Jenny, teacher, doesn't want to mark anymore. There are parts of the spec where AO2 comes up a lot, and social influence is one of them. Marcus wants to persuade his group of friends to go traveling in the summer, but the rest of the group would want to go on a beach holiday. If you think of the same thing, then you clearly haven't done either. Traveling is obviously, I don't know why I'm explaining this, but it's when you're moving from one place to another, backpack on your back, you get dirty, you get disgusting, whereas beach holidays are meant to be relaxing and are generally boring. So in this case, the question is briefly suggest how Marcus might use the 3 behaviours, consistency, commitment, flexibility, to persuade his friends to go travelling. Now, I've got 2 examples here, just as an example. Let's go for the model answer first, which is what you really should be doing. So what you need to do is you have to outline consistency, then apply it. Commitment, then apply it. Flexibility, then apply it. But you cannot you cannot at any point outline it, because if you have a look, if you outline something, if you just tell me what flexibility is, not in context, you get no marks. So this is why AO2 is more complicated. It's not simply about putting direct quotes in. It does go. It is quite important. Yeah, well, I'll go for that in a second. So, Marcus. Now, again, just because I've just used the word Marcus doesn't mean I'm contextualizing. It's a good start, but it doesn't mean I'm contextualizing. Marcus should use commitment by displaying extreme behaviors to get his point across, even though it may sacrifice his standing. So that's not particularly good, even though it is model answer. It's not particularly good because I haven't really applied anything at this stage. But look where the blue is. For example, he could refuse to see his friends until they agree to go traveling. Traveling, that's the key word. Take words from the STEM and put them into your answer. That's one of the best ways to actually apply. Now, he could refuse to see his friends. Here's why AO2 is difficult. This question comes up. You can't revise knowing that a way to get your point across is to refuse to see friends. Who would revise that? The reason why AO2 is actually quite complicated is because with the applications, which as teachers we cannot predict, you have to really think on your feet. So, for example, Marcus wants to go traveling, his friends want to go on a beach holiday. You, in the exam, would have to think, hold on a second, what would be one way to show commitment here? Right? I've not revised this. I've not revised how people can throw a little hissy fit and go travel instead of beach holiday. You haven't revised that, so you have to really think on your feet and say, well, actually, one way that Marcus could get round his friends is to show commitment to his cause, even though it might sacrifice his standing in his friendship group and say, I'm going to refuse to see you. Likewise, furthermore, he must show consistency by sticking with his traveling plan, there you go, and not occasionally agreeing with his friend's idea of a beach holiday. So again, that would be one way. And again, you can't revise that. You can't revise like, right, if they ask about traveling and beach holiday, right, how would I show commitment here, right? So they've asked this. What are they going to ask for you? What is the situation going to be? What is the scenario? What's the STEM? What would, Tallulah's issue be? You've got to think on your feet. Usually what you would find is they would ask something that all students would have knowledge about, so maybe the idea of holding a snooker cue to hit a ball, or Marcus going away, or something like that. Lastly, he might show flexibility in listening to his friends. Now, again, not contextualized, but I do later on. He may compromise that and say that several stops along their travels would be at seaside resorts. Now, seaside resorts is not actually mentioned at all in the stem. So what I'm doing here is I'm going beyond the stem. I'm going beyond the stem and showing deeper application here. That's a good one. Each consistency, commitment, flexibility, they're all contextualized. I want to show you an answer which is really typical, really typical. And it even starts off the same way with Marcus. People do this and it really pisses me off when they go, Marcus, and they go, well, I've contextualized now, I've said his name. Like, just because you said his name does not really suggest. Now, nothing in this is contextualized. Nothing. What this person does, I say this person, I wrote it. What I did in this crappy answer is I've said Marcus, and then look at what I do. I basically then just outline consistency, commitment, flexibility. So Marcus could demonstrate commitment, flexibility, and commitment. I will just ignore that. Consistency. I said it was a crappy answer. I didn't mean it to be that crappy. So he could show commitment, flexibility, and so I've not applied yet, right? So he, again, you might think, well, I'm saying I'm applying it to Marcus, but then what you say afterwards is he could show commitment by the augmentation principle. That's really good. In fact, that's not even mentioned here. So the augmentation principle, for those of you who don't know or can't remember, is the idea that a small group of people within the minority are willing to take great risks. So this is when someone in the majority stands up for what they want to do, even if it is at the risk of harming someone. And that's true. That's great AO1. There's nothing wrong with that, but it doesn't answer the question about Marcus. Furthermore, consistency is when Marcus, again, mention his name, but not applying here, Marcus would not stray from his central message before what is his central message before finally he would need to show flexibility in his message. To do this, he might want to listen to the opposing side, and therefore he would be accepting of that side, joining his side of the argument. So nothing in this second point is contextualized at all. It all looks really good. It's all really correct, and it is all really correct, but it's not applied to the question. And the reason why you lot find AO2 so difficult is because you really know your AO1. You really get your AO1. You've looked at flashcards time and time again before the exam, and you really want to show off your knowledge. But this question's not about knowledge. So it doesn't matter how good your knowledge is. The question is about application. So lastly, the other place you are very likely to see let me show you a different one, actually. The last place you are likely to see is AO2 in 16 markers. Comes up a lot, to be fair. So these are what are called the 646 papers, or the 646 questions. So I'm just looking for one in particular I remember from phobias. You probably have seen it before. I mean, look, there's loads of phobias. So you got Tommy's phobia about birds. You got Kirsty's phobia about balloons, and this is the one that I was after. But it's because it's the 646 one. So again, bollocks. Stay there. There we go. The one about Kirsty is only 4 marks. So suggest again, but as soon as there's a stem, you are instantly applying here. Now, Kirsty is in her 20s, had a phobia of balloons since the one burst near her face when she was a little girl. Loud noises such as banging or popping cause her extreme anxiety, and she then avoids situations, which we know about because of the 2 process model, such as birthday parties and weddings where there might be balloons, or I was going to say, or funerals, actually. Are there balloons at funerals? I think that'd be quite inappropriate. Suggest how behavioural approach might be used to explain Kirsty's phobia. Now, have a look at this. Suggest how the behavioural approach might be used to explain. What that sounds like it's saying is, what is AO1? Tell me what the explanation is of AO1. But really, what you have to do is you have to bring your AO1 in, and like every sentence needs to be applied, basically. The one I wanted to show you, I got a bit carried away there. The one I wanted to show you was this one just here, and I'm not going to read the whole thing. So if you want to read the whole thing, you probably want to pause the video quickly. Hopefully, you don't pause it when I'm doing that thing. I'm blinking halfway through blinking. But the question in this case is discuss. So discuss is AO1 and AO2. So AO1, AO2 just here, fantastic. 2 behavioural treatments for phobias, systematic desensitization and flooding. And then where the AO2 comes in is you have to refer to the conversation above in your answer. What I say to students is the first paragraph, AO1, where you literally do not talk about the mum, you don't talk about the dad, or you don't talk the Hitler dad who wants to throw his son in the water, and you don't talk about the boy who is inevitably drowning. In your AO1, you just tell me 3 marks of flooding, 3 marks of systematic desensitization. What we said in the last video, brilliant terms, specialist terminology, in vitro, in vivo, hierarchy, all these things, graduated exposure. Then separate line, blank line, and then AO2, you use a lot of these terms in here. So for example, off the top of my head, I'm just going to apply off the top of my head here. You might want to say that, well, systematic desensitization can be seen in the mum's approach, because she says that she would sit with him in the car at the swimming pool until he calms down. Then we might go to the viewing area. Then we might be ready to go to the pool. And she takes a graduated exposure stage and approach to the son, whereas the dad is literally wants to flood his child by drowning him. They've clearly thought about this quite well. And then you go on to AO3s, basically. So that is basically all I wanted to say. Don't get into this habit of thinking that AO2 is just quoting. You have to make sure that when you're asked to apply every sentence, this is the key bit, every sentence needs to be applied to what the STEM is actually talking about. Not very easy, actually a lot more difficult than you think it is, but actually not harder than evaluations at all, which we'll cover it in the next video. So hopefully that was helpful. My other advice would be get this document, and if you don't have it, then email me, or in my classes, look at Google Classroom, and just try the pure AO2 questions for practice. That would be really, really useful.